Everyone, good afternoon. Welcome to the UK Pavilion. It's Energy Day. I hope you're all feeling full of energy because it's certainly an absolutely packed day. We've got a huge number of events happening here through the pavilion, also in the main plenary halls, loads and loads of exciting and really, really important announcements happening today. And we have more of that for you here today. So I'd really like to welcome you all here in the room, and there are people watching virtually as well. And thank you very much for coming here to this event hosted by the UK government and the Climate Investment Fund. My name is Kate Hughes. I'm Director for International Climate Change in the UK government. And I'm a long kind of supporter of the Climate Investment Fund as well. So it's very exciting to see this culmination of many people's work over many, many years as well for the announcements here. And the discussions we've been having today and will continue to have through today, but also, over the last few years and will continue, I'm sure, is about how the power sector and energy transition is absolutely at the heart of how we're going to meet those Paris temperature goals and keep 1.5 alive. And today's event is aiming to provide greater detail on two brand new CIF programs which are absolutely critical to that. The Accelerating Coal Transition Fund, ACT, and the Renewable Energy Integration Fund, both part of the Climate Investment Funds. And these are two programs which have already gathered a huge amount of interest over the last few months, and we're kind of unveiling more today as well. So back at the G7 earlier this year, the UK's G7, the leaders pledged up to $2 billion for these programs. And that expression of interest process which followed that invited developing countries to submit their interest to join these programs, and it was heavily oversubscribed, which is great. But ACT in particular is already becoming that central step for countries' coal phase-out ambitions. So today we're going to hear more from people involved in all of this and find out what's going on. We've got a few keynote speakers for you to start with, and then we have a bit of a panel discussion as well with representatives from the UK, South Africa, and the CIFs, so we can understand it a little bit more. So first of all, with no further ado, I'm going to invite our first keynote speaker to come up and tell us a little bit more. And I really want to welcome His Royal Highness Prince Jaime de Beaumont de Palm from the Netherlands to say a few words for us. Thank you.
Hello, good to be with you today. And I've seen here in part of the COP, it's all about formal negotiations. So while they're there, figuring out how the world community make very clear steps forwards, and the world is watching us to deliver on mitigation, adaptation, climate finance, and the rule books. I see this whole other part of this COP that is talking about alliances. How can we move forward? We don't have any spoilers on this side because if you don't want to join, you don't join. So I see a lot of momentum, a lot of good things coming out of the COP, and this is one of those places where I see things happening. So ladies and gentlemen, it's great to be here and to speak about the launch of the Climate Investment Funds. We have a strong call from developing countries and MDBs to replenish the CIFs, and these two programs, Accelerating Coal Transition and Renewable Energy Integration, are ready to take off. So this is a celebration here today. We are recapitalizing the funds, and we gladly supported these new programs through the Energy Transition Council, through the work by SMAP, and through the membership of the Climate Investment Funds. And the UN high-level dialogue on energy that happened in New York in September, the first in 40 years. We're very happy that it happened. And our slogan there was to put really much attention on leaving no one behind. We cannot reach our climate goals when people are left behind in energy poverty. In the last couple of years, I've been working also before becoming climate envoy of the Netherlands with the UN on refugees and on the energy transition in the deep field. And there I've seen people that are absolutely deprived of energy, but also live in incredibly climate fragile areas. If you think of the refugees in Jordan, they live in the desert. The refugees in Bangladesh, they live in places where there's landslides and floods. So this is the place where access to energy will give them the resilience and the support they need to be able to survive and to become self-reliant. Here we use the word adaptation. In humanitarian world we say resilience. It's more or less the same. Now, it's an essential step, and not just for humanitarian, for development as well. and it's poverty alleviation, economic development, and it's jobs, 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 and jobs, as we hear so often our leaders say, but it's true. And to us, the climate investment funds offer a unique platform to leverage the full potential of the multilateral development banks, because renewable energy requires long-term public investment at scale, and the MDBs are the best way to deliver that. And we were positively surprised to see that 54 countries were expressed their interest in CIF Renewable Energy Integration Program. So there's a strong thirst for this flows of funds. Our contribution of $100 million together of that of the UK and others, allow for work to start in 5 countries, in Colombia, in Fiji, Kenya, Mali, and Ukraine, and 5 others already lined up to follow suit. And we expect many more funders to join and support these initiatives. Now, for now, I'm happy to jointly kick off this event and express our appreciations to you, Mafalda, and the CIF team putting this forward, the UK, the G7 partners, for your support and commitment. And I really think that these programs can have a big impact on our focus on keeping 1.5 degrees alive. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for the contribution from the Netherlands to the REI programme as well. Hugely important, as you've said, and setting out exactly why. I'm just going to say now as well, before we kind of introduce the next speaker to the stage, as I said at the outset, it's a hugely, hugely busy day today across a whole range of energy events. So I know a number of our speakers will need to leave to go and talk further about this agenda elsewhere. So if you see them leaving, that's why. But I just wanted to put it out there now so you all know, because there's a whole range of other things going on. So next, I would really like to welcome the UK Secretary of State for Wales, the Right Honourable Simon Hart, to say a few words as well. Thank you.
Your Royal Highness, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for the opportunity to come here. And I want to start really by endorsing the comments of Prince Jaime, and particularly in relation to access to energy as a global concept. And I think that one of the things I can talk about is how a small country, and I represent a small country, population of around between 3 or 4 million, how a small country can make a big difference in this endeavour, because we read a lot about the global challenge, and sometimes small administrations, areas of sparse population can ask themselves the question, how can we meaningfully contribute to this goal? Well, I think we can, I think we are, I think we're doing it individually, but I think more importantly, we're doing it collectively, which is where His Royal Highness put his finger absolutely on the button. As I said, my area of responsibility is Wales, famous, world famous, if not for rugby, for coal. And so any transition away from something which has such cultural and economic significance is bound to be a big deal. But it won't be a particular surprise, I suspect, to you that the transition is being embraced. It's not being looked at as some kind of tiresome moral obligation that we have to contribute to. It is something that our population, our industry, our local authorities, Welsh Government, UK Government are actively embracing. It's a big deal, but they're actively embracing it, even though it has got, or maybe particularly because it's got some fantastic and exciting community benefits, job possibilities, and of course contribute so significantly to our global effort that both of us have referred to. So why is this? Of course it's because there is economic opportunity. Nobody's shy of accepting and indeed welcoming that. And of course because of the moral obligation, which when we look back 10 years barely existed, we look at now as an absolutely routine part of our narrative. And if we're optimistic and we look forward 10 years, we can only dream of the possibilities that await us, not only in economic terms, but also in our climate change objectives. And one of the reasons for this, and why I can speak for Wales, I would like to think, is we have such an exciting array of alternative energy sources. There are very few nations, probably in the world, which have the potential that we have in Wales around wind energy, particularly floating offshore, around an increasing opportunities in the solar sector. We probably have the world's greatest undeveloped large-scale nuclear site at Wilva on the the island of Anglesey. We have marine technology cropping up around the coast of Wales, whether that's tidal or wave. And of course, we probably have an underdeveloped hydro sector too. And if you think I've left out hydrogen, I have done for a purpose. Who would think that actually the world's first, possibly the world's first commercial hydrogen jet liner will have its wings built in Wales by Airbus, who are determined to be first off the ground with commercially operable hydrogen-powered flights. We have River Simple in mid Wales, probably never heard of, been developing a hydrogen-powered vehicles, small last-mile delivery vans for some time, setting the pace unrecognised until now. We have a UK government investment in Holyhead, the Holyhead Hydrogen Hub, and of course we've been putting money into institutions like Meritor in Cwmbran in South Wales around hydrogen propulsion, retrofitting large-scale HGV vehicles, retrofitting them to give them hydrogen power capacity. So I hope will be of encouragement not only to delegates from the UK but from the rest of the world too, that every single decision that is taken by UK government and every single decision taken by Welsh government too is taken against the checklist of net zero. And this is why this conference, and I think the completely refreshed attitude of green finance is actually so interesting. I was speaking to a delegate earlier on who told me that they've been to pretty well every COP that there has been, but they've never witnessed the enthusiasm and commitment and input and potential that is being provided by the global investment market in this particular field. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to finish on one thing. You would have heard till you're blue in the face or ears the expression levelling up. And I think levelling up is absolutely synonymous with the ambitions of net zero because it joins in a sustainable objective small communities, large communities, urban communities, rural communities, not just across the UK, but hopefully across the world. And I think just in the same way that our investments are looked at through the prism of net zero, so levelling up will be the vehicle that delivers that. And so from a small country to a global audience, I think anything is possible. And if COP's anything to go by, I think when we meet again, perhaps in 5 or 10 years' time, we will be telling a very different and I think a very positive story. So thank you for all that you do in this endeavour. And in my part of the world, we are embracing this with considerable excitement, and that's largely because of the inspiration which these kind of conferences generate. So thank you very much indeed.
Exactly. You know, this is about delivery now and making things happen now and changing what we do. And actually, it's great that the speakers so far have already referenced the four kind of main COP themes that we have this year. So it's, you know, this is about mitigation and reducing those emissions. It's also about adaptation. We've heard about that. Finance, absolutely critical, but also the point about collaboration and working together to make this happen. So thank you for doing that and for your words. And now I'd like to also pass over to Patricia Fuller, who is the Canadian Ambassador for Climate Change, to tell us more about what the Canadian government is here to do.
Good afternoon. Bonjour. Thank you, Kate, for having me here today for this event. And let me congratulate the UK for the great leadership you've shown on energy as part of the work towards this COP, and to you personally, because I know you've done a lot to get us to where we are today in the great announcements that are taking place. A lot of UK arm twisting around the world. So congratulations for that. So phasing out coal is, I think you all know, that the single most important thing that needs to happen to enable us to meet the climate change goals. Coal is the single largest source of global warming. So phasing out coal is a must, and it was for that clear reason that Canada and the United Kingdom joined together 4 years ago to create the Powering Past Coal Alliance, which will shortly have its main stage event. We've come a very long way in 4 years, starting from some 20 members to a large number that we'll announce very shortly today. Come a long way in getting commitments to coal phase out and in creating an organization that is really a mutual support group for how to do it right and how to do it in a way that's inclusive, that does respect the principles of just transition, and that shares experience around the policy issues that governments have to work through in making this kind of transition. And for Canada, we've done that at home and are completing that process. We committed 4 years ago to phasing out coal by 2030, which is the goal for the Powering Past Coal Alliance for its developed country members. We've put those regulations in place. We've had our task force on just transition, and we're in the process of implementing the recommendations of that task force to undertake our own coal transition in Canada. And now we're going farther with the announcements that we made at the beginning of this week from our Prime Minister that we will be ending the export of thermal coal from Canada. So that is the next step that we're taking in Canada. But we know that to get this done globally, we have to support developing countries in taking these steps, because we know they're not easy. We know from our own experience. And we know that phasing out coal cannot come at the expense of energy security or energy affordability or energy access for populations that currently don't have access to energy. So we are fully committed to supporting developing countries in making this transition to coal, away from coal, making this transition to clean energy. I was checking to see if you were awake. And to get this done, and this is, I think, the point we're at now, we know what the goal is, we know this is essential, we need to get it done. It does take scale. It does mean putting in place projects and programs that are at a scale that really do enable this transition to take place. So that is why we announced earlier this week that as part of Canada's new climate finance commitment, in which we've doubled our climate financing, that of that new round of climate financing over 5 years, that we will be committing up to $1 billion Canadian to the transition away from coal. So that is about $800 million US dollars. And we will be channeling this money through the Climate Investment Fund. We do think that this is thank you. It is a big amount of money, and it is because we know that this takes scale. So this is why we've made this significant investment through a vehicle that we know can drive the kind of coordination among donors and with partner governments in the developing world to put in place the kind of projects at the kind of scale, say that word again, this is really about scale, to get this done. And this will mean leverage. It will mean bringing in those private sector dollars that will take this $2.5 billion for the ACT to a much bigger number in terms of the kind of investment that we know it will take to achieve this transition. So I'm very excited about this step that we're taking together with the World Bank and with the UK and other partner governments. It will be essential that we have a very good working relationship with the developing country governments that are taking these steps and making these commitments to this significant transition. A lot of work to do around policy and regulatory areas to make this successful. But we're very pleased to be able to play a good role in this as Canada. So thank you very much, and c'est un plaisir. Bonne journée.
Well, merci bien. You made the point about scale, and I think that's that this is critical, and also to kind of working in partnership. We kind of come back to that word again about working in partnership with all countries if we're going to deliver this transition, but particularly the countries that we're working with. So we've had commitments now to the ACT, Accelerating Coal Transition Fund, and to the Renewable Energy Integration Fund as well. We heard from the Netherlands. So it's probably about time to welcome Mafalda to the stage to actually tell us a little bit more about exactly what these funds are and what they're going to do. So Mafalda, please come up and join us.
Thank you very much, Kate, and thank you for organizing this event with us, but most importantly for being such a great champion of the CIF since its inception in 2008. I liked very much what the Honourable Secretary of State for Wales said, anything is possible. So I will start with that because we actually started off in 2008. And if you recall 2008, it was a time of financial crisis. And it was a time when international climate change negotiations weren't progressing as well as many would hope. And we didn't really have a lot of climate investments in developing countries to speak of. And over the past 13 years, what we have been doing with the support of our donor countries, we have been able to demonstrate in many developing countries, we work currently in 72 developing countries, that it is possible. Anything is possible. We have, at a time when private sector sponsors weren't necessarily so keen in making investments in renewable energy in developing countries, where the capital was not flowing to those type of projects in developing countries, we have enabled those investments to happen. We were there financing first, second, third of its kind of these investments, and we have opened up markets. We have brought private sector to countries where they hadn't invested before. We have brought the domestic capital markets to bear in supporting these investments. And we have come a long way. And what we have done has contributed to this momentum that we are seeing today in terms of where the renewable energy costs are and where the learning curves are. So now we are at a point in time where we are talking about accelerating. We need to accelerate this energy transition. We know the energy sector is critical. It is responsible. It's the sector that has the highest contribution to GHG emissions. And so we know, and I mentioned this morning when I was in the plenary as well, that we basically have three tasks ahead of us. One is renewable energy installed capacity, increasing substantially this renewable energy installed capacity, going from 1,400 gigawatt to 17,000 gigawatt. 2/3 of this in developing countries. This needs to happen in developing countries. But as I said, because of our work and many others over the years, we have seen the renewable energy markets evolve quite significantly to the point that these investments are cost competitive, if not more competitive than fossil fuels. So the next big task ahead of us, of course, those investments need to continue to be enabled, and we need to continue to support developing countries, make sure that the right policies and right frameworks are in place to attract the private capital, and if need be in certain countries, de-risking tools. But I think the real task ahead of us right now is these other two areas, is phasing out of coal, because if we don't phase out of coal, there's no way we're going to meet the climate goals, as we've heard from the other speakers as well. Coal is the largest source of GHG emissions, and the largest contributor to the increase in global temperature. So we have to really focus on phasing out of coal, and it's a massive task. According to the numbers, we have to be phasing out 100 gigawatt of coal capacity a year, which is a very significant task. And in parallel, we have to be investing in the power systems, because the power systems right now are not equipped and prepared to take on all of this renewable energy capacity that needs to be put in place. So this is why these two programs that we are announcing, launching, very happy to be launching today here at the COP, are so critically important. So we are really at the frontier again of what needs to happen and how we need to support developing countries really advance significantly this energy transition agenda in their countries. But as we've also heard from Patricia, all of this needs to have at the core just transition. Because if we don't have just transition at the core, I think most of us, if not all, believe that we are not going to make it. So just transition needs to be really at the core of the coal phase out. We have to make sure that we are also making the investments that are necessary so that people don't lose their jobs, they don't lose their livelihoods, and they have other opportunities. So this is exactly what these two programs are all about. We are launching today the Renewable Energy Integration Program. We are with the contributions of the UK, Netherlands, and Switzerland. We are starting off with 5 countries in different parts of the world so if I think I can remember them all: Ukraine, Mali, Kenya, Fiji, and Colombia. So as you can see, different parts of the world, different types of countries as well. And we are also launching the Accelerating Coal Transition Program. And in this program, we are going to start with large economies: South Africa, India, Indonesia, and Philippines. Canada made an announcement earlier this week, the Prime Minister Trudeau, of a very significant contribution, as Patricia said as well. UK had already confirmed this contribution to the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, a couple of weeks ago, or a few weeks ago. We also have contributions we expect contributions from the US, Denmark. So we are starting off on a really solid ground with more than probably $2.5 billion of capital, which we hope will mobilize, according to our experience, can mobilize 10 times more and really drive these investments in these countries in the years to come. On coal transition, and I'm sure probably we'll get to discuss it in the panel, as I said, we are not just focusing this program on the assets, on the coal-fired power plants and retiring and repurposing those, or closing of the coal mines and reclaiming those lands, but we are really focusing on the governance elements and on people and communities. So we are bringing about this very holistic, integrated approach to dealing with this agenda, which is complex. It is a lot more complex than new renewable energy capacity, building and investing in new renewable energy power plants. And again, some countries have gone through this experience. Patricia from Canada was alluding to it as well. This is complex. So we need to really bring to bear the best of us, the best of our institutions, to really succeed and have an impact. But I think we are right at the center of this agenda, of this energy transition agenda, and tackling really the strategic areas that will push forward the reforms that we need to see in developing countries. I always say also often that it is important what happens in developed countries, and developed countries leading the way in terms of climate action, but actually climate change is going to be resolved in developing countries, because it is in developing countries where 2/3 of the infrastructure investments will happen in the decades to come. And these are trillions and trillions of dollars worth of investments. If we don't make sure that these investments are done in a low-carbon, resilient way, we've just locked in capital and probably locked us into the trajectory that we certainly cannot be, and it's not aligned with Paris. So this is really exciting. I'm really thrilled to be able to be in this position and launching these new programs, and look forward to working with our contributors, the countries, and the multilateral development banks as our implementing partners, in again bringing the type of impact that we've been able to demonstrate over the years. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mafalda. And I mean, and how exciting is this? We've had announcements of finance from countries. We know that this is then going to leverage, about 10 times more of private finance and MDB finance as well, to have a real impact on the ground. And that's what this is all about, and helping that move away from coal. Not just that, but also that transition towards renewables, and doing that transition in a just and inclusive way as well. Absolutely critical that we get that right. And I've been privileged enough to see some of the real world impact that the CIFs have already had out there, shifting not just the economics, but also energy access, the technologies, and the lives of people, whether from Chile to Morocco, from Egypt to South Africa, to India, and so on. So thank you very much. But now what we're going to do is hear a little bit more from a panel about actually what it means on the ground and how that looks and feels as well. So I'm going to introduce our panel up here. It's brilliantly not gender diverse, so I hope you'll forgive us for that. So first of all, Lee McDonough, who is Director General for Net Zero Strategy and International in the UK Government, the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. Wherever you are comfortable, but don't sit on the tables like I did in my very first session. And we have Mandy Ramberos, who is the General Manager in the Office for the Group Chief Executive of Eskom in South Africa, and heads their work on the just transition. And Mafalda, we'd love you to join us again as well to tell us a little bit more. So to kick off with, I would love to just, and hopefully you would as well, just to kind of hear a little bit more about, kind of what this means, and and why it's relevant for us as the UK, but also for South Africa. So I mean, maybe Lee, you can just kick off and just say a little bit about the UK's ambition for energy transition domestically, but also how these programs that we're talking about today fit into our vision for the international transition as well.
Press something. No, it just comes on. Hi. Thanks, Kate, and it's great to be here. I'd just like to say this is my first COP. I don't know who else is in their first COP, and I'd just like to acknowledge just what a fantastic event it is. So, Kate, I know you've been working really hard for a long time to deliver on the whole agenda, as well as this event now. I can't get over the level of energy and excitement that's around here, and the level of commitment as well. So, I just wanted to say that up front. And then, in terms of for us, in terms of our domestic ambition, you've asked. I mean, I think Simon said earlier, in terms of our commitment in the UK to phase out coal by 2024, and some of our ambitions in relation to offshore wind. But if I could just maybe expand a little bit on some of our domestic ambitions, which were set out very clearly in our net zero strategy, which was published, I think, 2 weeks ago now. And in that, in relation to the energy transition, we made a firm and full commitment to decarbonise power sector by 2035 through electrification and support from low carbon hydrogen. And we also proposed a range of deployment levels for offshore wind, for example, for low carbon hydrogen production, for carbon capture, and for heat pumps, for example. And that's all set out in our strategy. So I think we've been sort of very clear on some of our ambitions for energy transition. And as part of that, we also made a really strong commitment to driving delivery and scaling up private investment, which, as many people have said, is really key to delivering on this agenda overall. And that includes approaches such as contract auctions for renewables, or contract awards for carbon capture and hydrogen use. So if you haven't read our strategy, please do have a look at it, because it does set out very clearly our stall. So that's domestically. And then, Kate, you sort of said, our international agenda. And on that, I guess there's three sort of elements just to flag. One is around raising political ambition, and we've already heard speakers talk about the Powering Past Coal Alliance, for example, as a really good example of that. Also real focus on supporting developing countries, which is the essence of this whole programme in terms of removing barriers. And Mafalda referenced the announcement by Boris Johnson at UNGA to support considerable investment on that. And then really important to have high quality finance, actually. And the UK has, as you know, doubled its International Climate Fund up to 11.6 billion, with an additional billion available, which the Prime Minister announced on World Leaders Day, subject to the economy recovering, I think is the phrase, but really strong message about how supportive we are to that agenda. So in relation to these programmes and how they match that, I think it's very clear, both ACT and REI are totally in line with our ambitions, both domestically and internationally. And I just wanted to say, in relation to CIFs per se, these are tried and tested delivery mechanisms, and we're wholly supportive of this agenda. I think big, strong track records of delivery, of making transformational change on the ground. So we see, our continued engagement in this and support of the CIFs as just, I think, a continuation of a very successful relationship that we've had for some time. Thanks.
Excellent, thank you. And maybe, I guess, building on this, Mandy, I'd love to turn to you just to hear a little bit more about, South Africa's own plans for your energy transition. And I guess, what attracted you to kind of applying to the Act from South Africa's perspective as well? How did you approach it, and why was it a good thing for you to be doing?
Well, it's Mafalda's sparkling personality that made us apply. Well, we've been working, from a South African perspective, there's a number of challenges that we are facing. I come from the electricity industry, as you say, and our coal plants, firstly, our electricity generation is 88% coal. So we have about 54 gigawatts of installed capacity, and 88% of that is coal, so it's huge. And so our plants are on average 41 years old, and they, operationally, if you follow electricity in the media, you would see that we have a very low capacity, so we have a supply-demand deficit. So our plant is aging, we're running out of capacity, economy is in economic decline, and so there's a number of factors coming together in terms of us transitioning into a future that is going to help grow our economy, move towards lower emissions, cleaner technologies. And fortunately, even if you didn't care about the climate, which we do, you look at the cost of renewables, and they've come down quite drastically in the last decade, by more than 60 to 70%. So for us, it was an obvious choice that you would have to transition towards cleaner technologies. But I think even more obvious for South Africa is you have to have a just transition. We have a huge community, a huge social impact on shutting down coal and shutting down coal plants. A lot of the communities and a lot of the people that live around the coal plant and the coal mine depend completely on that for their jobs. So if you're transitioning, if you're shutting down coal, you have to take care of the social impact. And so for us, like I say, it's compelling that we would have to look at a just transition. It makes absolute sense from a perspective of the social impact of transitioning towards cleaner technologies, but also very importantly, growing our economy. So if I look at the opportunities along that value chain of installing cleaner technologies, renewable technologies, is local manufacturing, industrialization, job creation, which is so crucial for our economy. And also, because electricity is about 40% of the emissions in South Africa, of total emissions, if you decarbonize the electricity sector, which is the quickest and the cheapest to decarbonize, you have a positive impact on the other sectors of the economy: mining, agriculture, automotive vehicles. So there's obviously a knock-on impact. And if you look at, a lot of people think intuitively that in South Africa, the highest employer is the coal mining industry. It actually isn't. It's the automotive industry. We make vehicles, VWs, BMWs, Mercs, that we export to the European market. And because the European market is moving towards electric vehicles away from internal combustion engines, we would lose about 80% of our export market if we don't transition. So if you transition electricity and along that value chain, you also transition our automotive industry, you have a positive impact on jobs, on local manufacturing, and on industrialization. So from that respect, it was, like I say, very compelling for us to apply, and thankfully we were successful. So very grateful for that. And of course, now the hard work starts in doing the investment plan and making sure that what we're putting into that plan is makes sense for the country and is implementable.
Well, it's such a compelling story, as you said, and that's also why, I know the UK and South Africa have been talking extensively and have been signed up to our own sort of Just Transition program as well, which I think is hugely exciting. But, the way that you also described how the impact across the much wider sector as well is incredibly compelling. I just wondered then if you could say a little bit more about, what do you think that, what are your sort of hopes for what that looks like in terms of a just transition and what that means for the workers and the communities, but also, the energy provision for South Africa in, 5 years' time or something? What does it look like?
So we've got a just energy transition strategy, basically, and we've broken it up into, we've got the 50-year goal, the net zero by 2050. I most times don't know what I'm doing in 2 days, let alone 30 years. So we've broken that down into what I like to call edible chunks of a strategy. And so from an energy perspective, as we shut down our coal plants, we're looking to repower and repurpose them. So we would look at building renewable plants on our sites, on our coal sites, as we shut down those units. And it's not mutually exclusive. If you've ever been to a coal plant, the land is huge. So we've already started with a pilot plant in an area where we're shutting down quite a number of plants. We've started building a pilot agrivoltaics plants where you combine agriculture and PV. So if you picture a PV plant, with tall gantries that you can actually drive a tractor underneath, we're combining the electricity provision with agricultural activities. So working with local farmers in terms of what crops can you plant on that land that was previously a coal-fired power station. We've also just completed engineering studies on quite a number of plants that we're shutting down to look at capacity. So how much PV, how much battery, how much wind can you install at those plants? And so from an energy perspective, the technology in my view is very obvious. We're looking at commercial technologies, plug and play basically. So PV, battery storage, and wind. Makes the most sense. We're obviously looking longer term from a research perspective into green hydrogen and those, but they're not commercially available right now. We need capacity now. So we're not going to play around with technologies that are not commercial. From a social perspective, we've also done socioeconomic impact studies on what will be the impact on those communities when you shut down the plant. So the reason I was saying the technology part is easy is because the social part is actually the hard part, right? When you're talking to communities about what would the impact of shutting down this power plant have on you? So we've done, the studies are not just about economic modeling, GDP and jobs, but actually household surveys, business surveys, ward councillors, mayors, our consultants spoke to everybody on the ground in the local languages to say what would the impact be on you. So we have a whole lot of data sets from the hard data modeling to the softer people's views and opinions. And what we're busy now is with mitigation plans around those risks. The biggest risk, people, obviously, is job losses, but people are also so optimistic about being involved in the repowering and the repurposing. So they're saying they see the positivity around shutting down coal from an air quality perspective, from a water, from a health perspective, but also from that job creation perspective. And when we talk local jobs, They always say to us, we're not talking about jobs in Johannesburg or Cape Town. We're talking about jobs where you're shutting down the coal plants. And so we're looking at creating jobs right in those areas. And so the funding that we've applied for will look at not just the energy perspective, but also ensuring that we include private, Eskom is a public sector company. So it's looking at partnerships with the private sector, but also dealing very specifically with local job creation.
Thank you, and I think you're absolutely right. We have the technologies, we know what to do, but doing it in the right way and doing it exactly as you said with the people, the communities on the ground, and talking to them at the outset and building that in from the outset, and not it's not an afterthought. It's got to be done right from the beginning is so important. And you've got a long history with the SIFs as well. I know with kind of award-winning projects there as well. So it's really exciting to hear about this kind of next phase of work as well. I mean, Lee, I don't know if you wanted to say a little bit more about, kind of what the UK is finding particularly exciting about this kind of just transition work and working on these projects as well.
So, in terms of these projects and the things that sort of attracted us to them, we talked a lot about transformational potential, and I think I'll say it again, the track record of the SIFs in delivering real change on the ground is, hugely important. And then I think the other thing that is really, critical and why these are so aligned with where we want to go is the very specific focus. We've talked about, the urgent need to move away from coal and, towards renewables, and having that specific focus and being able to leverage through the MDB's investments and the fantastic leverage ratio that we know has been delivered. That just allows you to do things at scale, which again is what we've said is really crucial. And then in terms of the inclusivity and just transition, you've talked very articulately about it, as did Patricia and Mafalda. There are, I guess, some other specific considerations like gender and Indigenous people's rights. And I know that that's been a key part of the SIF approach in the past. And so, that is something that we want to see continued. And as you know, today we have announced, along with other donors, our Just Transition Declaration, which is obviously a really important step to say what we mean by this and to show our commitments to this agenda. I think that's really great. And I'm hoping that by doing that, we're setting the bar for the future for everybody, including delivery partners, the MDBs. We all need to have this, I think, as Mafalda said right at the start, as the centre of our overall approach.
Excellent. So yeah, exactly. So kind of setting that bar and sort of showing the way of what we can do. So Mafalda, it's probably a good time to come back to you and just hear a little bit more. Just so you put your mask back on and get comfortable. There's no rest here for you, Mafalda. So, what you've been designing these programs for a long time. Do you want to sort of say a bit more about, how actually you've built in this sort of just transition, that inclusivity, from the outset? Because, we've learned that that's so critical. So how do you kind of see this responding, to kind of those points that Mandy made about South Africa and the other countries that you've been working with and I guess designing this for?
Yeah, okay, great. I think not just I think we have been witnessing in several countries that if we don't think quite closely and with the right level of focus and prioritization to social inclusion and social equality issues, we're not going to have the support of the population to the reforms. And so from the perspective of course, poverty elimination, development, from a moral, ethical perspective, making sure that people are not left behind. But we also have to understand that unless if we place this at the core of the climate change agenda, we are not going to meet the goals. So from that understanding, we set up a Just Transition initiative a couple of years back, and we've been doing quite a bit of work in this area. Trying to understand not just the experiences from what are the experiences out there, are there experiences from developing countries, how does one think about just transition, How does one think about delivering just transition? And in fact, even recently, we published another case study on Mpumalanga, the region in South Africa that is quite central to this agenda because it's the coal region in South Africa per excellence, and then Jharkhand in India, one of the states in India. And when one looks at these type of analysis, one understands it's not just it's rather complex, because it's not just the direct jobs and the indirect jobs. So in some of these regions, we can be talking about 10% of direct jobs, 10% of the total region's jobs are direct jobs, 30% of the total region's jobs in indirect jobs. So we are actually talking about a very significant amount of jobs. But we are talking about other things as well. We are talking about revenues to the municipalities that would be lost. We are talking about pensioners that are relying on the current employees to ensure that they have their pensions. We are talking about revenue and income to other businesses that are in the supply chain. We are talking about revenues to the transport sector in the case of India. So it's a rather complex ecosystem that needs to be looked at quite carefully. And some of the work that Mandy mentioned in terms of modeling, analysis, and consulting with the population is absolutely critical to then design the programs that will be needed to deliver on that transition. And I think, our understanding is, and this is why we've placed it so centrally in this program, Accelerating Coal Transition Program, because it is our belief that unless if we see this as equally important as the assets, if not more important, we will not achieve the objectives. Therefore, I say, social equity, social inclusion, climate change is two sides of the same coin. And but in the coal phase-out agenda, it's absolutely critical. So we very much look forward to collaborating with South Africa, with the other countries as well. I think South Africa is well placed. All of you probably heard that there was a political declaration announced earlier this week of a solid partnership of international donors and South African government in making sure that this energy transition process in South Africa is adequately supported. And South Africa, Mandy and I have had this conversation, can really be an example to not just in Africa, but a global example of success. But it is complex. It is a very complex agenda.
Absolutely. And I think it's really interesting that this conversation, we wouldn't have had this conversation kind of 5 years ago, I don't think, quite like this, because it would have been about just the assets, as you said, Mafalda, and just focusing on those. And I think often, we've had conversations in the past about, well, if you're going to do this big scale, sort of mitigation projects, and it's just about the tons of carbon, and you can't think about, kind of gender considerations or jobs or social equity and inclusion and all of those kind of things. And actually this shows that just isn't true at all. Actually, you have to do this in the right way if we're going to make this work for everyone and leave no one behind too. So we'll come to questions from the floor maybe in a little bit, and if the panelists are able to stay. But I just wondered if each of you just maybe had 30 seconds on, I guess, sort of your hopes for the future, either sort of domestically or internationally, in terms of where might this take us, and what are the changes that you think we'll be seeing on the ground in the coming years as well? Because it's always nice to kind of look forward and be a little bit optimistic about where this is going to take us. Lee, do you want to kick off and we'll come down?
That's quite a hard question for me, I think, Kate. But look, what I would just say is we've talked about needing to up the bar And so that's what I want to see, the bar being upped. But also something just struck a chord with me when you were talking, both of you, just how powerful the stories are when they're real. So, showcasing what can actually happen. And it's what Simon said right at the start, which is, you can do impossible things. And so I think one of the things I'd like to see from this programme is just real visibility of the success stories, so the beneficiaries of the investment, so that we can actually just share and make sure that people can have something to connect to, so that they can see what's the art of the feasible.
Absolutely. Mandy, how about you? What does it look like?
So I think, we've been having very useful conversations over the last, number of years. I wouldn't want to tell you which COP this is for me. So for me, it's action and implementation. Even our communities are saying, we've been talking about this just transition for a while now. Can we actually see projects on the ground, projects implemented? So for me, that would be really successful, and to actually use local communities to do that as well.
Go on, Mafalda.
I think, I think we have a really unique opportunity right now in time to tackle the greatest two challenges we have, which is climate change and social inequalities, because we know that inequalities have been growing globally. So actually, I'm quite encouraged and positive, because if we, and I think there's a growing understanding that if we place what we call just transition, but if we place social inclusion, social equality at the core of the climate change agenda, can you imagine we really tackle the two core challenges of our time? It's fantastic. And so I'm not saying that, again, that this is easy, but we are faced with a unique opportunity here. And we are in a pandemic world. We have seen that. We have seen things happen that we didn't think were possible before. We have seen a lot of political will and action. So mobilizing that political will and action, and really learning from the things that we haven't done in the past in similar crises. I think we really have a major, unique opportunity here. So we are pretty excited about this program and what it can demonstrate. In our work on just transition, we are not just focusing on the coal sector. We are working on other sectors as well of the economy, because the just transition agenda, as we are talking about, is not just a power sector issue. It is an issue across sectors. But again, I'm really encouraged that this is a unique opportunity in time.
Absolutely. I was just reflecting too. I started today at an event called Powerful Women, which was about women in the energy sector, and actually if we actually sort of harness the capacity, the innovation, the skills of everyone, how much further and faster you can go. So we've all got an amazing panel here, but also it's tapping into that point about actually harnessing the capacity and the skills and hopes of all people into this transition. It isn't just something distant that happens over there. This is something which affects all of us, and we all need to be absolutely part of. So we've got a few minutes, and we might be able to take a few questions from the floor, I think, if we can. So let's gather them. I can see 1, 2, 3, and we'll take 3, and then we'll see which ones our panel can take. I don't know quite how we're going to make this work. You might just have to shout.
There's a microphone here, Kate. A spare one. I don't know if we can pass it around.
Thank you so much, and thank you for an inspirational panel. It's wonderful to hear people talking about the just transition and about greater investment in renewables. But I wanted to...
Sorry, do you want to say who you are and where you're from as well?
Absolutely, sorry. My name's Neil McCulloch. I'm an associate of the International Institute of Sustainable Development and also a director of the policy practice. But one of the questions which I had really for Mafalda and also for Mandy was about the third element of coal phase-out. Renewables is great, just transition is absolutely essential, but many countries, particularly developing countries, are locked into long-term power purchase agreements. And nobody's mentioned power purchase agreements, but these are really problematic. We heard yesterday Sri Mulyani, the finance minister for Indonesia, say that Indonesia could contemplate bringing coal phase out back into the 2040s, but only if it received financing which would enable it to exit from these power purchase agreements in the order of $25 to $30 billion. Now, the total fund so far is $2.5 billion. That's just Indonesia. Indonesia's not alone. Philippines, Vietnam, many others have similar problems. So what I would love to get from the panelists is some sense of what can be done to help countries exit from power purchase agreements, particularly long-term power purchase agreements, which are relatively new and therefore relatively valuable. Thanks.
Great. So let's collect the other two questions. There was one back here, and then we'll come to the one over here. Thank you.
Thank you. Clemens New from Asia Weekly. I have a similar question. You mentioned earlier that the 5 countries you're working with. So my question is how you select those countries, and is there a funding gap to support more developing countries to make this transition?
Great. And then there was someone over here, wasn't there? Thank you. Sorry, it's audience participation. You've also got to carry the microphone. Sorry about that.
Hello, my name is Shandell O'Neill. I am a sustainable energy specialist and a human rights advocate from Trinidad and Tobago. My whole concern was more around like preventing greenwashing and ensuring it's proper design. So you're talking about local manufacturing, but what about like local design? Because one thing with like solar panels, they're designed under like 25 degrees Celsius, dry air, but in the Caribbean it's more 32 degrees humidity. So I just want to make sure when we're doing this whole renewable energy transition, we're taking into factors like different weather conditions that are really becoming serious concerns in how we make this whole transition. It's just my concern. Thanks.
Brilliant. No, listen, 3 great and kind of, I think, really sort of linked up questions about how we make this work in practice. Mandy, do you want to have a crack at those first about, we've got PPAs, we've got selecting countries, and kind of really making sure it's designed properly to fit local circumstances? Whichever ones of those you want to take.
Yeah, sure. So on the PPAs, it's an excellent question because, we, if you look at our power plants, for example, we're shutting down in the next 15 years 22 gigawatts of coal. That's a lot. I was joking earlier with a colleague from Barbados who was talking about shifting their electricity sector. I said, what's your installed capacity? And it was 260 megawatts. And that's half a unit on one of our coal plants. Involved in so many years ago, the coal was really cheap in South Africa. Electricity was really cheap. So the power plant got involved, the power company got involved in a number of long-term power purchase agreements. Exactly that problem that you're touching on. So what we've done is we've not entered into any new power purchase agreements. We've looked at the coal supply we will need for the coal plants that we currently have that we are shutting down over the next 20 years. And then what we've also done now is we've just got into partnerships with our coal mining companies. So I think it's very important to have that discussion with the coal companies themselves. And fortunately, a number of them also have a transition strategy. So we're working together with them to see how do we actually do this transition together. Some of our coal companies one of our coal companies back home actually has come up with a very innovative idea around selling us energy instead of coal. So building renewable plants on their property and selling us, Eskom as the electricity utility, the renewable energy instead of coal. So bringing down the cost of coal that we would need and also being able to sell that on, wheeling it through the grid. So I think the idea is to work collaboratively. A lot of them are commercial agreements. So obviously it's not all rosy, but to actually work collaboratively and look at what are the innovations around that. I don't like this term, but there will be winners and losers. And I think you have to face the reality of that. And some of them, there are penalties around getting out of those contracts. And unfortunately, in some cases, that is just something, a pain that you would have to take. In terms of the local manufacture and so we are looking at that specifically. So we're not saying, for example, right now, quite honestly, we can't compete with China for developing wafers for your PV plants. So we're looking at what it is that we can develop in South Africa, and we're looking at the frames and the gantries, the glass plating for the PVs, and that is what we're looking to pursue to develop. So it's going to be fit for purpose what we can do at home. So on the selection, I think that's your question.
So on the selection of countries, we actually invite countries to express interest according to certain templates. And then we have independent expert group assessing those expressions of interest and making a recommendation to our board. And it's on the basis of that, that analysis that the board then makes a decision on the countries that are selected. On the coal transition program, we had 14 expressions of interest. We are starting off with 4 countries. Hopefully, we'll be able in the near future to bring others. But in the meantime, we will be exploring options of supporting also those other countries with technical assistance, for example, the entire 14 countries.
Great. We might have time if there's any kind of one final quick question.
Thank you very much. We are coming from Balkan region, actually from Serbia, and represent private companies, state-owned companies, and NGO sector dealing with energy transitions. And we are very interested to figure out the way how to participate in the program, particularly your program, because we have several huge state-owned coal companies that are ready for energy transition. At the moment, we had a pilot project dealing with fast-growing plantations as a biomass that can replace the coal or at least co-burn with the coal. So it will be very good if we can provide kind of a direct communication and to figure out the way to a little bit speed up that process. Thank you.
That's probably one for you again, Mafalda.
We have some expressions of interest from Balkan countries. And as I said, even though we are not going to be focusing our investments in this first phase on those countries, because we've selected those other 4, we are exploring ways of supporting all 14 countries. But certainly we can talk some more.
Great. So listen, I'm going to bring this session to a close by saying a huge thank you to all of our speakers, but particularly our powerful women panel here for their thoughts, their insights, and for some really insightful comments as well. And and actually a huge thank you to the CIFs in particular and to Mafalda for actually delivering real world results. That's what we are all here for actually making this happen on the ground and for delivering that transition that we know we all want to see, and for building in the people at the heart of this, so that actually this isn't a transition that happens over there that we think about on paper and we think will happen one day. It's happening here and now, and we're doing it in a just and inclusive way with the Climate Investment Fund. It's super exciting, and I'm really looking forward to this next phase of working with you. Thank you very much, everyone.